Hi, my name is Bob Lesnefsky. I am the founder of Vagabond Missions.
And I'm Andy Lesnefsky. I'm the current president of Vagabond Missions. And today we want to share a little bit of stories of hope, stories that maybe practically inspire and teach about evangelization. But before we do that, just to explain what Vagabond Missions is, first and foremost, a lot of times people ask why the name. And so a vagabond, when we use that word primarily, first and foremost, we're referring to Jesus as someone who didn't have a home. You know, he says the birds have dens, the foxes have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. So Jesus is a good reminder for us that while we're here on while we're here on earth, that heaven is our home, and we long for that home. And so as Vagabond missionaries, we try to share the gospel with inner city teens, and we do that by equipping missionaries. In every city that we serve, we operate a youth center, but really the primary place of ministry where that happens is by going out into the street, by going out to basketball courts, wherever kids are, that's where we serve. The cycle of hopelessness is really being broken in the inner city as missionaries have this chance to just introduce teens to Jesus and to a community of adults who love them. And so we're really grateful just to see miracles happen every day in the inner city and just to be a part of that. But maybe as a first story, Bob, do you want to share a little bit about why Vagabond Missions got started?
Sure. So, when we first started, it wasn't because we wanted to. I wanted to do youth ministry. That was something that was passion on my heart. But just the place that I got, put right after I got married, ended up being an inner city area. And though, all the things you would think that are intimidating or scary, overwhelming about an inner city, like those things were intimidating, overwhelming, and scary for us. It's just, violence, drugs, the hopelessness, like there was just a lot. And we were upset. We wish we weren't where we were. And wanted to be doing another type of ministry, even though this was the one we kind of fell into. And what changed for us was that we started falling in love with these kids. I think, that's always, for me, it's always a good illustration of, this, when we talk about saintliness, or the call to holiness, it sometimes that's hard if you just look at it as marching orders. Well, here's what you got to do to be holy. But it's not as hard to look at when, we think about the concept of falling in love. When we fall in love with someone, like I always say, like when people fall in love, they tend to do stupid things. Like we can think about that when we're kids and our friend falls in love, and all of a sudden they're all about, Amanda or whatever. And they start, their life starts to revolve around this person. And for us, that's kind of what happened, is like not only did we experience God working powerfully in the inner city, but we started to realize that even as a church, as the Catholic Church has really been a champion of the poor and a champion of reaching the marginalized, this somehow in our country has become somewhat of a vacuum for ministry. And we started to see how God moved, and we started to see the beauty in some of these teens' hearts that really, although had a harsh exterior and some difficult things that were going on externally, really were hungry for God, hungry to know that they were loved. And so we really started to fall in love. We fell in love with this type of kid, and we said, like we want our lives to count for reaching the lost, and specifically reaching this kind of kid that maybe has no one else reaching out to him. And that's who the church is. So it started small, really just with just something that kind of scarred us, and then really we realized that the church has always responded to this. This is what she does.
Yeah, I think it's amazing to see how something started in a small way, and now, I mean, God has just been so good, and there's so many things happening in the last few years. I think one of my hopes for this presentation was to say, what are some practical things? What are some things that I think we can all learn or do from our experience? And I wanted to share. I think one of the things that I think is difficult. Sometimes I think people hear the word missionary and they think of, maybe people who are doing missions work like on the streets, like Vagabond Missions, or, a foreign missionary or whatever it is. But, really at the heart of the church, the essence of the church is missionary, And so I think the first main point I love to share is that we're all called to mission, and that not every person is called to, inner city mission work. But everyone's called to mission in some way. That the heart of the church is mission. And a friend of mine once, I love this, said, like, the church is a unique organization because in some sense it exists primarily for the people who are outside of it. So just that the focus always has to be on going out. And I want to share a story of one of our current missionaries now, who started off as one of our teens, actually, in Greenville, North Carolina. Deja just was always a fun, fantastic young woman, and when we encountered her, she was just going through a lot in her life, and the missionaries were really like faithful to her, and faithful to like being a missionary, being involved in mission work with her, and she came on this camp week with us, and which is just an amazing week for kids to experience Jesus, experience community, experience fun. And when she was there, she was like struggling so much to the point where we just decided it wasn't the best place for her to be. So had to make this decision to send Deja home. And I remember thinking, like, putting any kid in a van to send them home from an activity, a camp like that, you think maybe this kid will never come back around. Just, I would say, what's so beautiful now is like just to see the faithfulness of God as we're faithful to mission. Faithful to doing what he calls us to do. And so as we're all called to mission, just to remind you, just to encourage you, whatever state you find yourself in life, is to be faithful to that call. And so Deja went home, and the missionaries in her life were persistent. And one of the things we see time and time again with our kids is not every one of our missionaries is, the coolest, just has the coolest clothes or just fits in exactly. In some sense, you're stepping into an environment that you feel like as an outsider to share the gospel with people. But they're persistent. And so they were persistent in Deja's life. Deja not only ended up coming back around to the ministry, she ended up really having this experience of conversion, this experience of change. She became Catholic after some time doing a year of college, decided I really just want to do mission work. And just so proud of her today as she serves now as a missionary here in Pittsburgh. And God's just doing amazing things. It's one of these stories of change, of how God, as you're faithful to the call, that he remains faithful and is even more faithful than we can possibly be to that call to missionary activity.
I think that's, it's a great point, this idea of being consistent, with someone over time. In fact, I always try and tell people, like, like when you're looking at evangelization, I think the keys are, when someone's consistent and it's natural, it's like normal, which tends to be messy and clumsy. And, so one of the things I think we do, I think we do both of those things well at Vagabond, but like I think one of the things that we've really honed in as, our mode of evangelization is what you said is, it's incarnational, that God steps into our world, and in that, that he sanctifies those moments. And so, for us, a moment of evangelization might be playing basketball, or it might be having a hot dog with someone. Like, And that's good news for us, because any of us in any line of work or with any type of people that we want to make an impact in their life, those are things anyone could do. You don't have to be Scott Hahn. You don't have to know everything about theology. You just have to know how to do friendship. And all of us, have encountered good friendship. So a story that I think, is a powerful one from our beginnings, much like your story, because it ends with someone who's now working for us, but is a story of a kid named Joe, who, when I started in New York, this kid would, he was in the neighborhood, the general area where the church was, but he was trouble. Like, he got arrested for smashing out like windows in this nearby school, and then eventually he got kicked out of school, dropped out of school. He did a lot of drugs. Sometimes he would have a weapon, but he would come into church with no shirt on, and like even in the middle of church, he would be like kissing girls, and it was just such a funny now story, but at the time, just like, man, this kid is just about as bad as you can get when it comes to looking at a situation. How am I going to deal with the situation? In fact, it got so bad that the volunteers that I had that met, that helped run the youth program, met with me, and they had this kind of secret meeting amongst themselves, and then pulled me in and said, we've decided either you tell this kid he's got to leave, he can't come back to the church, or like, we're leaving. And I said, well, like, this is like the heart of what we do. Like, this kid is exactly the whole reason we exist. And honestly, after this kid comes to know Jesus, which I'm pretty confident that he will, I hope we have another kid like him, because that's, it's like the whole idea is that, like, God didn't just come for good kids and easy to deal with people, He came for the lost. He came for the broken, which is us too. But anyway, like half of the volunteers left that night. The other half maybe were inspired by the idea of of sticking with this kid. But the long and short of it is, not only did this kid end up really having a powerful conversion, where he encountered God, and then began to respond to God in his life. He also experienced all kinds of success. Like, I helped him. He got his GED. Then he would come to my office, after he would take his GED classes, and then he started going to a local community college. Then he ended up, after that, he went to Franciscan. But not only has all these successes kind of happened in his life, but since then he's gone on to work for multiple dioceses. He's a youth minister. He was in charge of youth ministry. He oversaw, all this different stuff. And now he's an area director for us with Vagabond Missions. So, I think the moral of the story here is, one, it'd be nice to say, and you know what? And it was because I was so holy that I knew what to say to this kid, or I believed in this kid. But that wasn't really what happened. It was just, we stuck with him, and we didn't give up on him. And it was honestly pretty normal things that we did with him. It wasn't, breaking open the Bible with him every time. It was just being his friend and walking with him. And then as he wanted to know more about me, just like I want to know more about him, like, we got to ask each other hard questions and good things. But the moral of the story is, you don't give up on someone. We all have people in our lives that are just like, this person either drives me crazy, or this person is so far beyond God or beyond, conversion that, the truth is that none of us are beyond, God working in our hearts, and Joe's kind of a cool illustration of that.
Yeah, I was really beautiful. I love Joe's story, and I think we've gotten to see so many kids as we've just been really believing that God can do what only God can do. See miracles happen, and one other story I want to share. and it really drove home when I first started working for Vagabond. I worked previously in a suburban parish, and there's something amazing about the inner city because it's in some ways far worse than you can imagine, but at the same point, there's so much hope, even in the midst of hardship. And the kids we work with are so resilient and so joyful, and they've experienced things that I can only fathom sometimes, and but one of the kids that was kind of a troublemaker, if you will, too, was that this one night was acting up, and I had to take him outside and ask him to calm down a little bit during youth group. And later that night, he forgot his backpack and came back to get it. And usually we came in kind of the side part of the church where a youth center was, but he came in the main part of the church and walked through the church. And the only light that was on in the church at the time was on the crucifix. And he looked up at the crucifix and asked the missionary as he's walking in, he says, "Is that cream Jesus?" And at first, Christopher was the missionary, thought like he was being disrespectful, but realized as he looked at a crucifix, he had never seen one. And maybe heard King Jesus or something of that, and really wanted to know like what was this crucifix and what was the story. And it really drove home to me that like oftentimes I think we think of people who don't have any faith or don't know anything about Jesus might live very far away or be in a distant country or somewhere. But kids all around in our neighborhoods, maybe only 10 or 20 miles across town, might have no experience of faith. And to me, I think this reminds us, like, sometimes we talk about new evangelization, and that's about reaching those who have rejected Jesus, but really there are a lot of people who just never had a tangible experience of Jesus. And we talk about being incarnational, about putting flesh on to that gospel. But in some sense, it's just to be able to share that story. That night, Christopher just told them a little bit about who Jesus was, what the cross was, and it wasn't necessarily a life-changing moment, but it was a step for him. And we get to see this time and time again as we just, our kids are hungry, kids are open, kids want to know know this God who loves them. And so I think for each of us to be ready to tell not only our story, but to know the story of Jesus and to share that story. It doesn't have to be a perfect version or a complete version, but just to be able to step into that and to share that, I think is really impactful. And, I think, these are just a couple stories of change, of life change. We see this happen time and time again. And if you'd like to learn more about Vagabond Missions, you can go to vagabondmissions.com and learn a little bit more, connect with us. One of the things I think we love to do, and I think, I feel like both of us get to be some of the chief storytellers of Vagabond and just tell those stories of miracles. And there's so much good happening. And I think the Lord invites all of us into that story, into that, into that journey each and every day, whether you're a full-time missionary or, you're just a partner in mission. You're someone who's living mission in the midst of, maybe a job in corporate America or whatever you find yourself doing. Any closing thoughts you want to share?
I just think it's important, it's good illustrations. Sometimes we take things a little easier when we're seeing it through another lens or, seeing it in a dramatic fashion, which, when you're doing inner city stuff, a lot of times it is, it's sensationalized, it's dramatic, it's all these kind of things. And I'm thankful that we're able to, see miracles so closely, but the principles are the same. The idea that, man, how do I encounter my neighbor, and maybe my son or my sister-in-law or someone is like hard to reach, like when it comes to sharing the Lord or sharing truth with them. And the good news is that the things that always work is friendship. And being real. And so, that's the mode that the Lord worked, when he became one of us, that's how he did it, and so we're able to to mirror that, as we strive to reach others.
Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you for your time, and just pray that whatever work of mission that you're doing, that would be fruitful for you and your family. God bless.
God bless.